On any golf course, the greens are the center of gravity. About 40% of the shots you hit in a given round on a regulation course will be putts. Around half or more than half of the shots that you hit will be either putts or chips. And any approach shot that you hit, at least any decent approach shot you hit, will interact with the green or its surrounds. So today's topic is a very important one. In this installment of our Golf Architecture 101 series, we're talking about greens, how they're designed, how they're built, and what makes a good one. I'm Garrett Morrison, and this is Designing Golf. As usual, in Golf Architecture 101, I am joined by my colleague, PJ Clark. How you doing, PJ?
Hello. I'm excited for this one. Unlike I would say the majority of our prior Golf Architecture 101 experiences, I truly have no idea what I'm walking into today. So I'm very excited for this.
So what is it about the topic of greens that kind of opens up possibilities for you or makes you wonder where we might be going with this?
I feel like in prior episodes there was maybe a little bit of homework, so I had done some
I
prior
gave you no
research.
homework.
I've
Yeah.
done absolutely nothing to get prepared for this. There's not like it's very open-ended, as you just alluded to. Feels like a lot of directions we could go here, whereas we were doing a history lesson or Mackenzie's 13 principles, all things like that. It's very confined to this one specific segment, whereas greens, there are a lot of them. There's actually 18 of them on basically every golf course possible. So I feel like there's unlimited possibilities that you're about to hit me with right now.
It's a big topic, partly because of how important greens are in golf architecture. So yeah, a number of different things that we could talk about related to greens. Just to start off, do you have any takes about greens? Have you thought about green design, green architecture before? What do you like or not like in greens? Have any thoughts come to your mind about this area of golf course design before?
Not particularly. I'm when I'm out there playing golf poorly, I'm really just focused on how am I getting the ball in the hole. So I think, there are greens, like punch bowls or funnels. Those are fun for somebody that's bad. That I get to ride a little ridge that could get me closer to the hole. Again, the game is about getting the ball in the hole. But no, I can't say it's something that I actively think about. I understand I'm probably wrong in doing that, so I'm excited to learn why.
Well, there's no wrong or right here. If you enjoy punch bowls, you enjoy punch bowls. That's who doesn't on occasion like to see their ball actually go toward the hole when it gets on the edge of a green.
Yeah, once in a while.
Yeah, just once in a while. So, I wanted to do this episode partly because we have to do this episode in any kind of 101 series. You got to talk about greens eventually, but also more specifically because I've often seen a divide in the way that greens are discussed among golfers. When non-architecture geeks say that a course has good greens, they're typically talking about the condition of those greens, right? They're talking about whether they roll smoothly and quickly. That's good versus bad greens. Good greens are in good shape. Bad greens are in bad shape. Is that something that you've picked up on among the Gen Pop?
Yeah, absolutely. 1,000%. That would basically be the way I or any of my friends would refer to greens, on whether they're beat up or not, more than anything else.
That's right.
Yeah.
If you want to get along with people in a normal way, if you just want to be normal, then this is how you talk about greens.
Yeah, I get that. So I certainly have that box checked.
Now, when architecture heads say good greens, I think they mean something very different, right?
Yeah,
and that's gonna kind of be the governing principle of our episode here. What makes a good green beyond it just being smooth and fast? In other words, what makes a green well designed, not just well conditioned? A lot of this is obviously subjective, so we'll discuss that as we go along. Not everybody has to like the same type of design in greens, but I think there's a lot more to this subject than just the condition of the greens. Though we will talk about how greens can come to be well conditioned, because that has to do with design and construction as well. So admittedly, a pretty daunting topic to cover in one episode. In my intro, I talked about how many of the shots we hit during a normal round that interact with greens, 30 to 40 putts per round, depending on how we're putting, a handful of chips and pitches and recoveries from greenside bunkers. And then, of course, 18 approach shots, assuming those approaches get somewhere in the vicinity of the green. All of these shots are in some way or another engaging with the design and the condition of the greens. So it stands to reason, of course, that a golf architect would put an inordinate amount of effort into the design and construction of greens. It's a very high stakes portion of the golf course for an architect, right? If you don't,
it's a good way of putting it. It's high stakes. It is arguably the most important part, as you said there. So yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
If you screw up the greens, nobody's happy with you.
Yeah, no, you're spending a lot of time on them. So yeah, that makes sense.
All the details need to be right. And the result of this is that greens are the most heavily artificial components of any golf course, especially on a modern golf course. They are more intensively shaped than anything else. They have more drainage and irrigation infrastructure than anything else. So if you really want to assess the abilities of an architect and a construction crew, you need to start with the greens.
Yeah.
You look at the greens first to see how an architect has performed. And besides that, they just naturally attract the attention of the golfer. C.B. McDonald had a great quote about this, our old friend C.B. McDonald. He said, "Putting greens to a golf course are what the face is to a portrait. The clothes the subject wears, the background, whether scenery or whether draperies, are simply accessories. The face tells the story and determines the character and quality of the portrait, whether it is good or bad." I think that puts it pretty well. If you have good greens, you probably have a good golf course. The character of the greens is, to a significant degree, the character of the golf course. When we take photos of golf courses, think about what you're pointing your camera at.
Mm-hmm.
Usually you're pointing it at a green. And that is because, yes, indeed, the greens are the face. And the golf course doesn't really make sense without them. Now, before we get to what makes a good green, because that's the main thing I want to talk about today, what makes a good green, let's talk quickly about Volume 2 of Fried Egg Golf's coffee table book. Got to do this,
greens.
right, PJ?
A lot of greens in this book, I would assume.
A lot of photos of greens, a lot of discussion of greens, a lot of good stuff about if you're interested in green design. It's available for pre-order right now, Volume 2 of our coffee table book. This is our second collection of course profiles, and I think they really give a sense of what we prioritize in golf course coverage. We do hit some legendary courses like Oakmont, North Berwick, Fisher's Island, Royal St. George's, Pinehurst No. 2. But we also show the other side of the coin, courses like Wild Horse and St. Andrews Beach, two of the best that you can play anywhere for less than $100. Both have fantastic greens. In fact, actually, St. Andrews Beach, a green at St. Andrews Beach is going to come up today. We also have a little chapter on North Haven, a tiny 9-holer on an island off the coast of Maine. One of my favorite chapters in the book. So, a big range of golf course coverage here. And, this is Volume 2 of our coffee table book, but it's not like you have to read Volume 1 in order to understand Volume 2. This is a fresh new collection with its own identity, and we're really proud of it. I think it's extremely beautiful, and I can say that because I had very little to do with the only a few of my photographs are actually in the book, and the design of the book was completely out of my hands. And so, yeah, it looks awesome. Pre-orders are open now through September 4th to begin shipping on October 7th. Go grab yours at proshop.thefriedegg.com. All right. PJ, let's get into the factors that make a good or well-designed green. The first factor is obviously location. Now, we talked a bit about this in our 101 episode on routing. right?
Mhm.
Finding well-suited, compelling sites for greens. That means you can, construct the green in a simpler and more efficient way, and you get more natural results. You don't have to completely manufacture a green if you find a good site for it. You want a variety of green sites throughout the course. You can put greens on ridges. You can put them in valleys. You can put them on knolls or in saddles. You can put them on slopes of various kinds, back to front, front to back, side slopes. One thing that I always do when I'm walking through a golf course is I look at what the green site is. And sometimes it's hard to tell because, again, greens are heavily artificial, and it can be tough to tell what the natural environment initially was. But if you look around the green, look at the terrain, look at what the general kind of movement of the land is doing, then you can get a sense for what the original location of the green was and get a sense for how much variety the course has achieved in green sites. Courses where every single green is on a ridge or every single green is in a valley are likely to start to feel a little bit repetitive. So, my favorite greens, I think, are the ones that really use their natural landscapes and don't rely too much on manufactured features for their identity. They may have manufactured features, but the essential character of the green kind of comes from its location. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I think that I'm now going through. I haven't played a ton of golf recently, but I got to play yesterday. So now I'm going through yesterday, trying to think back to of green sites and seeing if I came up with anything or missed anything. This is a great picture here.
Well, I just brought up a slideshow. Now, for those who are listening audio only, don't worry. I'm going to describe what's on the slides in a basic way, and it's not going to be totally essential to the experience of this podcast. But we will show some photos of various greens on in this slideshow, and they'll be available on YouTube and all of that. So the green that I'm showing PJ right now is the third green at St. Andrews Beach, a lovely Tom Doak golf course in Australia on the Mornington Peninsula. And the reason I chose the third green is that it just has a wonderful natural location, and the green just sits in it. It basically sits in a high saddle. There's a ridge, and there's kind of a natural notch in that ridge where the green is sitting. And, this green derives its character from the landscape. A great site was found, a natural site was found for this green, and that's where it gets its personality from. So these are the kinds of greens that I personally really enjoy, because you're not relying too much on artificiality to create interest. So that is the third green at St. Andrews Beach. Any impressions from this photo as you're looking at it right now, PJ?
Well, I mean, it looks like it's supposed to be there, which I think is kind of what you're getting at, right? Like it looks, obviously trees or bushes, shrubbery was cleared out, but it looks like it is just fits in the surrounding environment. Like it was just a patch in the middle of these trees that they stuck a flag in. Like it doesn't look like anything was moved too much or out of place, which is appealing to the eye, certainly.
Like it was meant to be a green. And it might be something that you don't even notice as you're playing golf. You're just like, oh, there's a green. But that can be a good thing, that a green, it does not take you out of the flow of the round, doesn't take you out of the experience. You just feel like you're experiencing the landscape, and that the holes are sitting on the land in a way that feels inevitable or natural, and it doesn't even jump out to you. That can be a good thing because you can focus on other things. You aren't focusing on what the architect did. But the architect did a lot here. Tom Doak chose a really good site for the green and made the choice not to do much to it. So that's 3 at St. Andrews Beach. That's an example of how we'll go through some of these slides here. We won't, again, it's an audio medium primarily here, but you'll see some of this stuff on YouTube if you want to. All right. The second big factor, PJ, that I think makes a good green after choosing the location is drainage. Now, this isn't the sexiest topic in the world, but it is probably the aspect of green design that architects think about the most.
Okay.
And players think about the least.
Yeah.
And yet it's so important, right? It is when you talk to architects about building greens, they just talk to you about drainage. I mean the fun design stuff is it comes up later. One component of drainage is obviously site selection, what we just talked about, location. You choose locations that naturally drain well, which is why on older courses, you often see greens on ridges, greens on high points, or if they're lower, you see greens kind of next to creeks or natural ditches or other drainage elements that were just in the landscape so that the water goes off the green and onto this lower ground. So finding sites where there's lower ground around it can really help. And we saw that with the third hole at St. Andrews Beach. Even though it's kind of sitting low in its immediate environment, there are places where water will naturally drain away from it. Another component of drainage is contouring. Greens need to be molded so that the water funnels off and either spreads out or goes into drains. So you can't have places on the green where the water pools, right? And there are various ways of doing this. This is sometimes where architects can get into a little bit of trouble, because if you're contouring the green so that it drains off, sometimes you do that in ways that don't look very natural or that look contrived in some way. And, often on greens that I would consider kind of poorly shaped or poorly executed, you see what are called catch basins, right? And catch basins are these kind of swales around a green with drains at the bottom of them. Sometimes you see them in fairways as well, where, the water will obviously just, run into the swale and go down the drain. But when you look at them, it's like, oh, well, that's basically just a gutter sitting there around the green. Yeah. And, catch basins can be necessary sometimes, especially on sites that don't naturally have soils that drain quickly, but they have to be executed in ways that don't call attention to themselves. Mm-hmm. And I'll show you an example here from Bandon Dunes of a green surrounded by catch basins that I think kind of jump out to the eye and do call attention to themselves in a way that I don't find particularly attractive.
Sure.
So this is the third hole of Bandon Dunes. It's a photo from behind the green, and what we see are kind of these symmetrical swales all around the green, each of which has a drain at the bottom of it. And I just think this green could have been carried out in a more kind of naturalistic way, that these drainage elements could have been executed better. Now, I love this golf course. I think Bandon Dunes is a great golf course, but this is one green where I think, probably the construction crew could have done a little bit better. Does that can you see what I'm talking about in this image, PJ?
Yeah, I mean, it, at least in a way, I understand your critique from this aerial view. At least it's like, I don't think it's unappealing to look at. I don't mind like the symmetry. It looks a little kind of even on all sides there
Right.
in the catch basins, but the existence of the catch basins, I understand what you're getting at for sure.
Okay. That was a quick rundown of green construction and drainage. Just keep in mind that this is what architects are talking about when they talk about building greens.
This is something I've never thought of before in my entire life. So I'm here. This is already a win, I think, for this episode of Golf Architecture 101.
Perfect. Let's get to the third factor that I think makes for a good green, and that is the green's relationship with the rest of the hole. We've talked about this before on Golf Architecture 101. This is kind of the central aspect of strategic golf architecture. What is the relationship between the green and what's going on in the fairway and the tee shot? A good green, I think, determines the strategic character of the hole. That's the green to tee thinking that we have developed in some past episodes of Golf Architecture 101, thinking from the green backwards. The green is really the first thing that you need to contemplate before you understand a golf hole. And I think it's good greens that give you something rich to think about. Mm-hmm. So the first aspect of the relationship between the green and the rest of the hole is size and receptiveness. Right? Generally, the longer the average approach shot, the bigger and more receptive the green. Large greens allow for more margin for error and kind of suit the dispersion patterns of longer clubs. Broad open fronts with contours that help the ball onto the green can also be used when you're dealing with a long approach shot. So a long par 3, a long par 4, generally what you want to see is a larger and more receptive green. And so an example of the distinction between a green that can receive a short approach shot versus a long approach shot would be, on the one hand, the 7th hole at Pebble Beach, par 3, famous par 3, about a 100 or so yard shot, and the green is tiny. Now it has shrunk over time. It's probably smaller than it should be, but certainly it was designed to be small, partly because the shot that you're hitting into it is very short, and that size suits the scale of the shot. Mm-hmm. At the other end of the spectrum, maybe you have a green like the 3rd at Chicago Golf Club, which is a Biarritz template, a long par 3, where players are supposed to be hitting long irons or even woods. And what you see here is a nice big run up into the green, a broad open front. The bunkers are along the sides of the hole. And what you have is a nice big fairway where you can land your ball and let it run up onto the green. And then the green itself is very large, broad, receptive, accommodating, but still interesting because you have that little swale in front of it. And so you can kind of run your ball through that swale. And, of course, it's not an easy shot still because the size of the green is suited to the size of the possible misses that you would have with those longer clubs. So green size is a key component of that relationship between the green and the rest of the hole. But I do think that sometimes this rule is worth violating because it can create really interesting and exciting situations if the green is out of scale with the length of shot being hit. So think about the road hole.
Yep.
What makes that hole exciting? Well, it's the fact that the green is too small for the length of second shot that you're hitting into it. And probably part of the reason it's that size is that the hole started as a par 5 and people were expected to be hitting short third shots into it as opposed to long second shots. But now that we're more commonly hitting long second shots into the road hole, well, that's really quite a moment because the green is so fiercely guarded and it provides such a fine margin for error that you just have to pay attention when somebody's hitting a shot into the 17th green at St. Andrews. So architects can play with the scale of the green in ways that can be interesting, right? And that's one of the kind of mysteries of golf architecture. That's where some of the art comes in. When does an architect violate the usual norms of golf course design? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it feels like certainly something you not to say that you can't, but you shouldn't overdo, right? I think there's probably a level to having too many small greens for longer approach shots and ending up in too many bunkers or whatever else that the green is not receptive to. But I definitely think it's always good to get a visual or even strategic kind of change up. Like if I saw this green at Chicago Golf Club, like, yeah, there's a lot of room for error because you're presumably hitting a longer club in. I think there's a way. To me, I feel like, I don't know. When I look at that, there's way more. It seems more fun. You could get way more creative than, the 7th hole at Pebble Beach, where there's not. You have one option, right? Like you have to fly it all the way down there, and whatever happens. Where you could run something up here and run it through the middle and get it to the back tier there. If you gave me the option, I feel like, I don't know, seeing the ball on the ground more, I would take that over the alternative.
which is why long approach shots can be so great, right? And it's what we're missing in pro golf right now, is that spectacle of the ball on the ground. And it's part of why U.S. Opens often have a long par three. Makes the players really mad, but guess what? When you have long par threes, the ball is much more likely to be on the ground in entertaining ways. So, yeah, I mean, going back to the 7th green at Pebble Beach, if you had this green on a 250-yard hole, I'm not saying that would be a good or exciting hole at all, right? That would be, you could critique that hole for having a green that's kind of out of scale, out of character with the nature of the approach shot. But the example of the road hole tells you that there's some wiggle room there. There's some room to play there. You don't have to just follow the rules when it comes to the size of the green in relation to the length of the approach shot. Okay, so size of green is one important factor in the relationship between the green and the rest of the hole. The other big factor that I want to touch on briefly, and only briefly because we've already discussed it so much in past episodes of Golf Architecture 101, has to do with the orientation of the green and the hazards around it. You can have an angled green that provides the friendliest landing zone to the advantageous side of the fairway, that kind of opens up to one side of the fairway that is maybe difficult to get to, and you want to give the player a reward for getting to that side of the fairway. You can have uneven hazard arrangements, so a bunker in front of one side of the green but not in front of the other side of the green. Bunkers just on one side, just guarding one side, so that you can kind of play around and have an opening into the green. Now, those two factors can be certainly combined, right? You can have an angled green, you can have uneven hazard arrangements on the same green.
Yep.
The same is true of the third factor here, and that is tilt.
Yep.
The most underrated component of a strategic golf hole, I think. A tilted green that provides a backstop for the advantageous side of the fairway. And if you're kind of on the wrong side of the fairway, then the green runs away from you a little bit. And one of my favorite examples of the use of tilt in strategic golf architecture is the 10th hole at Augusta National.
Mm-hmm.
This green is so tilted from right to left. And then there's also a bunker just on the right side. So that's an example of an uneven hazard arrangement around the green. Clearly, the preferred side of the fairway is the left here, because you're hitting into the tilt of the green. If you're on the right side of the fairway, which is where this photo happens to be taken from that we're looking at right now, then you're really kind of playing across that slope in a difficult way. Your ball is going to land and kind of shoot forward. Whereas if you get over to the left, then your ball is going to have more of a tendency to stop on the green. But it's tough to get to the left side of the fairway because you have to hook it around the trees, etc. This is how green design can enhance strategic golf architecture. So I would say if the green's orientation and hazards correspond in some kind of logical and interesting way to the design of the rest of the hole, that is a big part of saying this is a good green. That is a key component. All right. So that does it for the green's relationship with the rest of the hole. We have a few more ideas to get to about what makes a good green. But first, I want to talk about our friends at the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America, or GCSAA. This partnership makes a lot of sense for us at Fried Egg Golf. Really, our company would not exist in its current form today without the help and kindness of superintendents. Many of these photos that I'm showing to PJ right now in this episode are photos that we took because we kind of snuck onto the golf course through the maintenance facility. Many mornings we have arrived early and parked our cars in the maintenance facility and then gone out onto the golf course to explore it and take photos. GCSAA supports more than 21,000 members worldwide, not only golf course superintendents, but also equipment managers, students, and educators. Celebrating its 100th anniversary this year, GCSAA continues to ensure that its members are on the forefront of research, education, innovation and advocacy through a range of programs and services. To learn more, go to gcsaa.org. Check it out. Great organization, and we're very proud to be working with them. Okay. Next up on the docket, PJ, for what makes a great green, I think we have to consider the examination of a player's skill here. And this brings in the subject of severity and the subject of consequences for poorly played or inaccurate approaches.
Okay.
The right amount of severity and consequence can make greens very exciting and properly testing of a player's skill, right? The test is of approach play, short game shots, and putting. Augusta National is the ultimate example.
Mm-hmm.
Those greens are so testing partly because of their severity. Shinnecock Hills also has some great ones. Very severe greens, not in the same way as Augusta's though, whereas Augusta National's greens have severe undulation and tilt. A couple of Shinnecocks have some tilt as well.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the danger at Shinnecock Hills' greens is around the greens, right? It's the consequences from misplayed approaches. So severity and consequence are key parts of what makes a green testing. But you can also have too much of those things, right?
Yeah.
It can also become absurd
Yes.
or one-dimensional. Do you have an idea of where that line is for you?
I don't know if I do just off the top of my head. Yeah, but I definitely agree with the theory of it being too one-dimensional. Like if every hole is surrounded by bunkers, if every green is surrounded by bunkers and there's no, runoff area, or if it's just very thick rough around every hole and it's the same thing repeated. I think it would be just more repetition than anything else. If you get up to every green and you're missing in the same spots and you're left with the same type of shot, I feel like that could get very boring.
We will talk about that later. I think that fits into another category that I want to get into, that the nature of the recovery shots that you hit. And that is, I think that's a super important aspect of a great green, is the variety of recovery shots that result from it. But yeah, as it relates to severity and consequence, I think that there's such a difference between seeing a tournament played at a place like Augusta National or Shinnecock Hills and seeing a tournament played at a place like Royal Birkdale, or probably the better example is Quail Hollow, where there isn't the same sense of severity and consequence. When an approach shot is sailing into a green at Quail Hollow, generally you aren't on the edge of your seat wondering what's going to happen. Whereas you are at Augusta National, you are at Shinnecock, and you're on the edge of your seat because you're like, there could be many outcomes here.
Mm-hmm.
And also this player is in the midst of demonstrating great skill. If they pull off this shot, then they've really done something, And if they don't, then something's going to happen to them. and that is, I think, very satisfying to us. But there is a line. And it doesn't have to do with fairness, I don't think. I think it just has to do with the fact that overly severe greens, overly punishing greens do become one-dimensional ultimately. And I think an example of that is at Shinnecock Hills, the 7th hole, the Redan hole at Shinnecock. Now, I just said Shinnecock's greens are fantastic. It's one of the greatest golf courses in the world. But I do think the 7th hole at Shinnecock maybe just goes a touch too far with the severity. There are very few pin positions. And so really, there's one type of shot that you hit on this hole. The margins are so fine that especially when the wind is up, I'm not sure it's really a test of a player's ability. I think it has more to do with just the luck of hitting one patch of grass that's like 1 yard left of the other patch of grass. Now, the main problem here, I think, is likely green speeds, which we'll talk about later.
Okay.
the green has become so fast that the tilt of it has become too much. There are only a couple of places that you can really put the pin and have the ball stay in place. And so I think that's more the source of the problem than the design of the green, but it's definitely still, it's entertaining to play. It's a tense moment in the round. There is a joy factor of watching great players tackle this hole and either get rejected or be relieved when they aren't rejected. But for me, it's just a little bit too much. It's just over the line. I don't know what your reaction to it was during the U.S. Open, PJ, the 7th green at Shinnecock.
It did. It kind of felt like the same. Everybody just ended up in the same, not the same spot, but it didn't feel like anybody was just hitting the green. I sat there for a while, I think on Friday, and it was just like every group that came through, it was kind of the same thing. It was everybody would miss. Maybe one guy would stick it, but it was not like. I do think there's an aspect to almost like 15 at Birkdale last week. Like I think there's something to be said for like a par feeling like a birdie in like a major championship round. Like you're picking up a shot. 3 at Shinnecock was like that during the weekend too. I think on Saturday, like everybody was bogeying 3. I do think like I think there's a real benefit to that in that you can gain a shot on the field by just making par. But I do think when it's, you're getting into a spot where everybody is playing the same shot or getting rejected to the same area because of a green, like, yeah, that could be a little boring and repetitive for sure.
I have my issues with the framework of test that we often use when we talk about championship golf courses. But I don't think we should throw that entirely out because, certainly part of the role of a golf course is to examine a player's skill and to identify a worthy champion. And there is a point at which a test becomes too unachievable. If a test is not passable at a reasonable rate, then it no longer feels like a proper test. And that's the line that the 7th hole at Shinnecock is at least right at and maybe over. Now, at the other end of the spectrum from 7 at Shinnecock, you have bowl greens, punch bowl greens, greens that funnel to the middle. While fun in moderation, while I think they definitely have a place on any golf course, they can wear thin quickly because they do flatten the difference between great, good, and average shots. And they narrow the range of potential outcomes. It becomes, again, one-dimensionality becomes an issue. So this subject of the test of the player's skill it's not something that I think about that often, unless I'm like talking with Joseph Lamagna, our colleague who covers professional golf. And if I'm looking at the competitive scene, then I'll think about test more. But the more I contemplate this category, the more I think, yeah, it is an important aspect of green design, that the amount of severity, the amount of consequence, dialing that in to the right level is pretty key. All right. Next factor that makes a good green, and we just sort of touched on it with 7 at Shinnecock, the variety of pin positions. A good green, I think, offers a well-differentiated range of pin positions. Pins in different sectors of the green, so right, left, back, front. Pins of varying difficulty, right? You have some on knobs, some on shelves, some in bowls, some near punishing hazards, right? Some kind of on the edge near a bunker where it's the opportunity for recovery is really difficult, and then others that offer more margin for error.
Yep.
When you look at a green, when you're playing a green, you only see one pin position. But I think a good thing to do is to look at the rest of the green and consider where the pin can go. That's a practice that I think allows people to appreciate golf architecture at another level not just look at the pin that you're playing that day, but look around the green and see where the pin could be put. Because occasionally a change in pin position changes the character of the hole.
Yep.
And here I want to look at the 9th green at Harbor Town. Now, if I can describe this for audio listeners, it's a crazy looking green, but it basically looks like Mickey Mouse. You have 2 big ears, and the green kind of forms a boomerang, a reverse boomerang, right? Have I described that correctly?
Yeah, I think so.
It's like a reverse.
The Mickey Mouse. The Mickey Mouse is
the Mickey Mouse. Yeah, just imagine a silhouette of Mickey Mouse. So you have these 2 big lobes on the right and the left, and if the pin is on the one on the right, well, you kind of want to be on the left side of the hole. If the pin is on the lobe on the left, well, you kind of want to be on the right side of the hole. And so here, the pin position does determine a lot about the character of the hole. And I think something that can make you say that's a great green is if the pin positions are like that. The pin positions really do provide a different experience from day to day.
Yeah, I think, again, I don't know that it's something that I've ever consciously thought about until right now. But yeah, especially if it's a course you're playing a lot, like you just said, the shot on this hole would completely change if it's, tucked to the right and there's that fall off there. Like, where you have to be, and it's asking a different question, which is, I don't know. I think it's cool to have that optionality. I think it's probably cool when you're setting up the golf course to have an option to make people do something completely different. I think it's cool if you're playing it for the second or third time, whatever, that you have a different shot than you had before. So yeah, I just me knowing nothing, objectively speaking, yeah, it seems like a lot of pin positions is great, because why wouldn't it be something different?
Creates a course within a course, or multiple courses within the same course. And that, a lot of golf courses, especially in the early part of the 20th century, were built with the assumption that people would be playing them over and over and over again. I think we've started to move away from that assumption in some modern golf architecture, especially at destination resorts, where the assumption is more that people might just be playing this course once.
Yeah.
But there is a level of complexity that I think comes from golf architects believing that people will play their courses many times. Because if they believe that, then they will probably design greens more like this one at Harbor Town, the 9th green, where different pin positions really do provide a different experience, because they're thinking, people aren't just going to see one pin position at this green, they're going to see multiple ones. At tournament courses, it's a good thing to do, because on different days, it's a different test, and you keep players on their toes. You don't allow them to settle into a groove. And that's something that you really get from the 9th at Harbor Town, because it is the host of the RBC Heritage.
You also need to make sure that you don't only have pin positions on the right side, because then it would not benefit drawers of the golf ball, and people might tweet about that.
Yeah.
So you got to be able to make sure you stay out of the crosshairs from any potential burner accounts on Twitter that would tweet about course setup and where the flags might be on a given tournament round.
That's the main thing. I feel like that's the main thing behind decisions and course setup, is to avoid that kind of criticism.
Not that that's ever happened before, but if it were to happen, you might want to avoid that.
Yeah, that would be crazy if that happened. All right, it's worth taking a little break here, I think, to talk about green speeds.
Yeah.
Because it relates very much to this notion of variety in pin positions. So greens like those at Augusta National or Oakmont were designed for stimp meter readings in the single digits.
Yeah.
Oakmont has always had relatively fast greens. Augusta National has always had relatively fast greens, but relatively is doing a lot of work there, because back in the, even just 30 years ago, even 40 years ago, greens were just way, way slower than they are now. The expectations, the standards around green speeds were so different. just a few decades ago. Now Augusta and Oakmont regularly push 13 to 15 on the stimp meter. And this reduces the amount of pinnable area, meaning that pins are put in fewer and less interesting positions. When you start to get greens that fast, you can't put pins on slopes anymore. You have to find the flat areas of the green. And again, that reduces the amount of pinnable area. It reduces the dynamism of the experience from day to day because you're taking away from the variety of pin positions. Now, that's a less complex test of skill, first of all, because putts are going to break less when you put pins in flatter areas. If you have pins on slopes, then you're more likely to have short putts that you have to aim outside the hole to make them. Yep. And so, green speeds flatten the test in that way. But the main problem is this issue of variety of pin positions. The faster your greens, the fewer the areas that you're going to be able to put your pins. And the really unfortunate consequence of high green speeds is that a lot of clubs end up feeling that they need to soften the slopes of their greens. They need to redesign their greens, take away the severity and character of their greens, make them flatter because speeds have made the greens dysfunctional, have made it so that they need to put the pins in the same places from day to day. And one thing that happens when you put pins in the same places from day to day is that the greens get really worn down in those particular areas, that the wear and tear is not spread out as much. And so green speeds are one of the biggest problems for golf architecture right now, but it's something that people rarely talk about. And it's something that it just feels like there's no going back. It feels like these clubs are just gonna keep pushing the envelope when it comes to green speeds.
Who will be brave enough to go back to single digit green speeds? Who and when? We call on you.
Yeah. I mean, to an extent, Shinnecock Hills, what during this last U.S. Open was remarkable because they were only in the 10 to 11 range. It was like, wow. But that's still really fast, And it is what you're pointing out there, PJ, is the issue. Who is going to do that? Who's going to stick their neck out and say, I'm going to have slower greens?
Yeah.
There's almost kind of like a macho aspect to this where clubs can't be seen as the wuss that has the slower greens. But of course it would be so much better for the playability of the golf course and for the integrity of the design of the greens. So I've just gone on a bit of a rant there. I want to do a sense check with you. Does that make sense how green speeds would relate with design in that way?
Yeah, because I feel like you can't, I don't know, if you have a great amount of slope in these greens or you have a pin on a spot where it's not reasonable to, you basically have to make it or else you're in ginormous amounts of trouble on a high-speed green, then of course that's not, I don't want to call it unplayable, but it's certainly not enjoyable. Like, I mean, do I care from a professional golf standpoint if the pros playing are enjoying the golf course? No, I don't. But from a recreational play standpoint, I think you got to just, give a dog a bone almost here and give people like a fighting chance. If you want to do this at a professional tournament, please, by all means, turn it up. I'll root for carnage and people complaining no matter what, because it's better for everybody that way. But I think who will have the courage to go back to intricacies on the greens and single digit green speeds? I'm happy to throw that gauntlet out on your behalf right here.
Anybody who's not hosting a major tournament, I think doesn't have an excuse. I think you can.
I love that.
You can do it. You're free. You're free of the shackles of big time professional golf. Your greens can be slower. You can retain some character in those greens. You can put the pins in interesting places. You just need to grow the grass a little bit higher. It doesn't always need to be slick. All right. Let's go on to the next factor that I think makes for a great green, and that is the variety of recovery shots. Something that you referred to earlier. Underrated aspect of green design. When you miss a green, what happens, and is it engaging? Is it varied? This really highlights the design of what's around the putting surface, right? Which is just as important as what's on the putting surface. When you think about recovery shots and what happens when you miss the green, then you start to think about something that people often don't think about, and that is the design of the surrounds. You can have a combination of short grass, rough, native grass, bunkers, and other hazards, and that combination can generate a great deal of variety in the short game shots around the green. So can contouring, right? Interesting contours around the green, unexpected contours, unpredictable contours can also increase the energy and dynamism of the short game shots that you hit around the green. It's a way for architects to define better and worse misses around the greens. Maybe some places it's really hard to recover from. Other places you're faced with more of a simple, straightforward chip back onto the putting surface. So there are a lot of possibilities that you can pursue around greens to create a variety of recovery shots. Now, it's something I always look at when I walk onto a green that I haven't seen before. I look around at the surrounds and I consider, well, what if I missed there? What would that be like to get back onto the putting surface? What if I missed over there? Would it be different? Would it be interesting? Right? It's a key set of questions that you could ask about greens to appreciate their design more. And, the frustrating thing can be sometimes that you look around and you're like, well, no matter where I miss around this green, it's kind of the same shot. Maybe it's surrounded by bunkers and it's just a bunker shot. Maybe, in the worst case, is simply surrounded by rough without much interesting contouring. And you're like, well, that sort of flattens the variety and the entertainment factor of missing the green here. On the other hand, when greens have a good amount of short grass around them, I think that's when you're really cooking with gas, right? Short grass can bring in that unpredictability and that variety of short game shots that I'm really looking for when I consider this aspect of green design. And one of my favorite examples is the 8th green at Augusta National. Remarkable green, a very strange green in many ways, just surrounded, very long and narrow, and surrounded by these huge mounds. And it's all short grass. Now, if you miss far to the left, you're going to be in the pine straw and trees. But for the most part, when you miss this green, you're going to be in amongst, over on the other side of, on top of, wherever, around these big short grass mounds. And there are so many different shots that you could potentially face if you miss this green, and so many different ways that you could approach those shots. This is what I think contour and short grass around the greens can bring that just rough and just bunkers never could. So 8th green at Augusta National, I think great example of that.
Well, yeah, it brings creativity for sure, and I think it adds a level of skill. Like if you're just in the rough on every hole and you're getting swallowed by long grass, that becomes a kind of a roulette spin on do you have a lie? Do you have a look? Like that kind of takes I think a lot of the fun out of it. You could just be totally hosed. You could be sitting up and you could have an accurate chip shot. And that certainly gets repetitive after every hole. I think 8 at Augusta National is a great example. I know a guy who hit a shot over the screen, rode it up one of the other mounds and came back down the other side and then made a putt to lead the Masters on Sunday. Like that,
who was this hero? Who was this remarkable and very appealing man?
Yeah, it could be Cameron Young. Who's to say? But I think that's like a perfect example of a level of creativity. Like when he set up for the shot, the broadcast wasn't sure if he was intending to do it, hit it over.
Yeah, they
the
were
green and
confused.
ride it. Yeah,
they were like, "Oh, well, that's that shot. So where is he going?"
nobody knew what was happening. Everybody just thought he scolded the chip, and then it came right back down off the mound. And obviously, it was intentional. And I think that is just a level of creativity, even if you don't have like the skill necessarily to pull it off. It makes you think more than, oh, I got to get up and down out of a bunker, or, oh, do I have a lie in the rough? Like, it just, again, it all comes back to, for me, like, I like, as somebody who doesn't hit the ball very high or anything, like, having the ball on the ground is cool to me, because I think, I don't know, more things can happen. It adds a lot more variability in good ways and bad.
Makes it more fun and honestly easier for regular players like you and me, but introduces a different level of challenge for guys like Cameron Young. Now, I'm not saying that short grass around the greens is going to produce higher scores. What's going to produce higher scores is if you grow up the rough right around the greens and make it super, super thick. And yeah, if your goal is to have a +8 winning score, then that's what you're going to do. But as we saw in the past at Shinnecock Hills, when they had rough right up around the greens, it, yes, made those chips difficult when you're chipping back onto a fast and firm putting surface from a buried lie in the thick rough. But it also stopped the ball from going to interesting places.
Yeah.
You'd miss over the back of the 11th green at Shinnecock, and your ball would stop on that slope. It wouldn't run away from the hole on that slope. And so that's the trade-off. That's what we have to keep in mind when we say rough around the greens or rough anywhere is the key, is that it grabs that ball. And the next shot may be very difficult. It may be easier to hit a chip off of short grass than it is to hit a chip out of deep, deep rough. But the trade-off is clear. You get more interesting shots, you get more varied shots after missing a green when you have a good amount of short grass, or at least if you have some combination of rough and short grass and bunkers and other hazards around the green. So the variety is the key.
It can't be the same thing every time. Like that and if it is the same thing every time, I would prefer it be short grass, just because of the variability aspect of what players can do from there more than anything else.
I'm with you on that. Next factor that makes a great green, originality. I want to talk just a little bit about originality, creativity, inventiveness of design. Kind of a tricky thing to talk about.
Yeah.
Because it's really a you know it when you see it thing, right? Mm-hmm. And it also depends on your experience, right? If you're somebody who hasn't seen a lot of different greens at a lot of different courses, you may not have an immediate sense of what's original and what's not, because it's presumably all pretty new to you. But to me, the greens that make you stop and say, I haven't quite seen anything like that before, are the most engaging ones, or at least the ones that make you feel like you're dealing with some kind of fresh execution of a standard concept. And that can be the case in template greens on CB McDonald and Seth Rayner courses. I wouldn't call those greens original, because by definition, they're not original. But when you play the Biarritz at Chicago Golf Club, which we just looked at, or you play the particular rendition of the Redan at National Golf Links, then you really do feel like something fresh is happening there because of the location of the green, because of the particular execution of the details. And so there is this sense of freshness and originality to any great green. Now, the easiest and probably best route to originality is taking inspiration from the specificities of the natural terrain.
Yep.
Nature is an endless source of originality. And if you just follow its cues, then you're going to have results that feel new, because there's no other patch of ground like that in the world. And if you just rely on that, then you are generally in pretty good shape. Great example of this is the fourth green at Royal St. George's. I have it labeled on the screen right now as the fifth green, and that's killing me. But only the YouTube audience is going to see that. So I'm sorry, that was a typo. This is the 4th green at Royal St. George's.
Yeah, this is crazy.
And look at that. I'm not going to even really try to describe it, but it's basically just this big green that's draped over a natural shelf.
Yeah.
It's tilting strongly from left to right, and it's just sitting there, right? It's just sitting there on the ground, and it's a great piece of ground. And that's all the green is doing. Now, I could go into how it corresponds to the strategy of the hole, and it does its job brilliantly in that way. But when you look at this green, you think, I haven't seen anything like that before. And the reason you haven't seen anything like that before is that this piece of land is its own unique thing, and the green just uses it. It is just set on it. And it's quite beautiful, and it is the 4th green and not the 5th green. Now, manufactured originality is definitely possible, but it takes a lot of skill, because a lot of people try to manufacture originality and fall short, because we're humans, we're limited, we don't have the same creative capabilities of nature, right? And we have to admit that in humility to we have to admit our limitations sometimes. But yes,
can't go Jurassic Park on a golf course, unfortunately.
Yeah, you can, but you need to have extraordinary skill. And you can really tell when somebody has that talent of being able to manufacture originality. Now, no architect, I think, can do it on every green, on every golf course that he or she builds. You have to sometimes be more natural in your approach. But I think that the course Old Barnwell, a recent design by Brian Schneider and Blake Conant, has some very manufactured greens, like the 8th green, which we're looking at right now, that do feel original and don't seem particularly contrived or overly based on other sources or it just like they don't belong there. They're executed really well, but some of them are very artificial. The key, however, is variety. And, sometimes the most daring thing that you can do, the most original thing you can do, is just set the green on the land. And another example of that would be at the same golf course, the 18th hole at Old Barnwell. What are you seeing here, PJ?
It's just sitting in the middle of a patch of grass right now. It's just, there's nothing there. It's just a flag and then the putting surface.
It is completely unified with the land around it. There's basically nothing that you can see that was constructed here. Now, I do know that, a few things, a few contours, a few details are pushed here and there, but the putting surface, the 18th hole at Old Barnwell, just really sits on the land. Now, what you can't really see in this photo is that it is very significantly tilted, right? Because it sits on terrain that naturally tilts, there is a strong pull toward the left side of the green as you're playing into it.
Yeah.
But this is the kind of variety that you need in approaches across a golf course. You had the 8th green, which is heavily manufactured, but does feel original, does feel like a fresh idea. And then you have the 18th green, which is literally just sitting on the ground. Okay. So originality, key component. Often that originality is going to come from nature, but sometimes if you have real proficiency, then as an architect, you can create some originality. The next factor that I want to talk about, PJ, and I want to follow up originality with this for a reason, and that is elegance. Sometimes architects do try too hard to be original. And the result of that is a chaotic mess of contours and just craziness, right? Wildness is not the same thing as originality. And it seems to me that occasionally architects are really trying to manufacture that sense of freshness, but they forget that elegance is also an important component. Probably my favorite greens are the ones that achieve everything we've talked about to this point while being relatively simple. or at least not seeming to have any unnecessary elements, right? Elegance in design is achieving what you need to achieve with exactly the right number of moves and no more. If the architect makes too many moves, then the green design can become muddled and incoherent, and you're looking at the contours and you're saying, okay, well, why is that there? What does that correspond to in the rest of the whole? What's the purpose of that? Is that really creating extra interest in the short game recovery shots, or a pin position that is genuinely interesting, or is that just not needed? So I love greens that do a lot while seeming to do relatively little. Good example of that is the 15th green at the North Course at Los Angeles Country Club. This is a short par 3. In this image, PJ, we're looking at the green from the back. It is a crescent-shaped green, very narrow in some parts of it. The back section of it is wider than the front section of it. And between those two sections, back and front, there is a big bump.
Yep.
Just like a buried elephant right there in the middle of the green. And that's it, right? Otherwise, there's some bunkers around it. But this green is really just about that shape that I described, the crescent shape, and that bump in the middle. And think about all the variety that you can get from that. You can put the pin in the front, this very, very narrow, tiny sliver of putting surface. It is the shortest shot, but it's very exacting because you really have to hit a narrow area. Then you have the back section where, more margin for error back there, but it's a longer shot and it's somewhat concealed from the tee. And then you have that bump in the middle. Just imagine what you can do with that bump. You can put the pin right behind it if you want to. You can put it right in front of it. That bump can create so much fun stuff in this hole. But again, elegance. It achieves a lot with relatively few moves.
Yeah, there's really not a lot going on here, but it is, you can do a whole bunch of that's very cool.
Yeah. And that is, I think, the factor that gets lost in modern design sometimes. I appreciate that a lot of architects are going for originality. They want to make something fresh and new, and that's a good impulse. Mm-hmm. But that has to be tempered by elegance, because I think that, any kind of art that I love has this aspect of elegance about it. I don't know about you, PJ, but I like literature where the author doesn't seem to be doing much, and yet a lot is achieved. Or movies where, it doesn't seem overly intricate, but actually there's a lot there when you look at it. It's a common theme for me in the stuff that I really respond to. I know not everybody feels the same way. There are those who embrace maximalism and like that exuberance of a piece of art where there's a lot going on. But personally, I take the most joy in things that are simple yet subtly complex. How do you feel?
I can tell by this conversation you're really fired up about the Avengers Doomsday trailer from this week.
Oh God.
You're ready to go. December 18th. You're going to be there at midnight. You're ready.
I just watched this trailer yesterday. I was like, oh God, that looks bad.
What would you say the Avengers Doomsday of greens are?
Maybe that, God, it's that Ryder Cup course, Marco Simone. There's a lot going on. Just threw everything at it, but there's not much of a point aside from making money.
I like that. That's good. I like that.
Oh man, it doesn't look like a good movie. What's going on? There've been some Marvel movies I like. What happened here?
It looks like it's going to be real bad. Very, very concerning. But
it just doesn't look. You look at the trailer. There's some shots where it's like, they're just standing in like a back lot in Burbank, and it's just they're surrounded by CGI, and it feels that way.
So here, we'll tie this back to golf courses now. What are your thoughts on the Odyssey and all of the practical effects? There's a lot going on, but it's a real piece of art. How would
Yes.
you relate that to a green indoor golf course?
Well, this is a really interesting question, PJ. Have you seen The Odyssey yet?
I haven't. It's my this weekend. I'm still hoping that I can get 70
Doing
millimeter
on
tickets
IMAX
somewhere.
screen. Yeah, the 70 millimeter screens are in limited supply. There's one kind of near me that I'm actually thinking about going and seeing it again on, but that might be too much. Well, yeah, I think there is an interesting link here. It might not be immediately what we're talking about with elegance. Though I think there is an elegance to Christopher Nolan's movies. The dialogue is relatively minimal, but there's a lot in it. Though I wouldn't say that the verbal aspect of Christopher Nolan's movies is like the best thing about them.
No.
The writing is not often the thing that you go to see a Christopher Nolan movie for. But just the sensation of sitting in a theater and watching something that you know actually happened.
Yep.
Not happened historically, obviously. Contrary to a lot of the online discourse, this is a fantastical narrative, which we can do whatever we want with. But you know that he filmed so much of what we're seeing on the screen. Yes, there are some special effects, but we know that we trust Christopher Nolan to keep that to a minimum. And so when they're on a ship in the storm-tossed sea, we know that what we're seeing on screen was actually experienced by these actors and the people who made the movie. We know when they're huddled inside that Trojan horse in close quarters, peeing and pooping on each other.
They shoved an IMAX camera in there. So.
They put an IMAX camera in there and they actually put the actors in there in the cold water and experienced that. And there is a visceral excitement to actually seeing something real. And by the way, that is what is sort of alienating about some of the recent Marvel movies, where you watch it and you just know like none of this has any weight of reality to it. And yes, to me, that does relate to golf course design, to green design, in the sense that you look at a green like the fourth green at Royal St. George's, and you just know there's reality to that green, that you are experiencing something topographically real. And that excitement is hard to replace with anything manufactured. Architects of great skill can get close, but there's nothing quite like it.
I think we might need to do a golf architecture 101 where you just compare famous golf courses to movies for me, because I think that would be really beneficial probably for my life. Like, I need to know who the Tom Cruise of golf architecture is that's trying to get everybody to come back out to the movies.
Yeah, but kind of does the same thing over and over again, even if that thing is like
that
good.
thing's a banger though. That thing goes.
Well, relating what we were just talking about there, the sense of reality and the sense of actually doing things and capturing them on camera, I think that's a big reason why Top Gun Maverick was such a big hit. It's like, oh my God, these people are in planes. They're actually in there in these planes getting hit by the G-forces. Yeah, they're not like shooting at each other actually. We know that, but you can feel that there is a real thing happening to the actor in the plane, and that is so exciting. And I feel the same, so much the same about golf courses.
That's that. I think there's a lot of meat on this bone. I think we might have to come back to this because now I'm extra excited about it.
You know what we should do sometime soon, PJ, is like a golf architecture 101 mailbag where we can kind of get into fun topics like this, get some questions from readers. You can come up with questions. I think a mailbag would be a good idea at some point.
There we go. Book it.
Final point that I'd love to make about what makes a good green. And I do want to apologize in retrospect right now. This has been a very biased episode where I've just been talking about things that I like. And, you know, the point of a 101 class is to bring have the students think their own thoughts and create their own knowledge and not to press your opinions on them too much as the professor.
Don't worry about me. Yeah, that's fine.
I guess I have strong opinions about this kind of stuff, but I'm always willing to hear pushback. The final component would have to be the attractiveness of the shaping and the finish work of a green. So how are the artificial elements of the green shaped to correspond to and blend in with the environment around the green? So the shaping that connects the artificial features of a green to the surrounding landscape is called a tie-in.
Okay.
Tie-in is a key term here. And it is what it sounds like. Tying in your manufactured features with the environment.
I heard a lot about this last week.
Yeah.
Came up quite a bit.
The tie-ins at Royal Birkdale. And I will say, I and maybe some other architecture nerds can maybe get too offended about substandard tie-ins at places like Royal Birkdale. And I do think that, some of the tie-in work, the kind of interface between the new greens and the natural dune environment at Royal Birkdale, I will stand by that. They're not good, but they're also not terrible. They're not the worst I've ever seen. And so I don't want to get too overboard about that. I still think Royal Birkdale's a wonderful championship venue, but that is something that really, especially when you're talking about, we began this episode talking about some of the differences in perspective between the general golfer and the dyed-in-the-wool architecture nerd. When it comes to tie-ins, that is a subject that architecture nerds can take very, very seriously, and potentially too seriously. But there's an important point here, and it's the tie-ins make the green feel like it belongs there. There's a lot of different ways to do great golf architecture, and it doesn't necessarily all have to be naturalistic. And I want to show you a final photo here of the 10th hole at Cape Arundel, which is a course in Maine designed by Walter Travis. When you look at this green, the 10th green, there's kind of a big false front, and then then it rolls into a middle section, and then there's a raised shelf in the back, and it's all kind of pushed up from the surrounding landscape. When you look at this, you aren't necessarily thinking, wow, that's all really nicely connected with the natural environment. Though I think the actual tie-ins between the high parts of the green and what's around it are at least smooth and nicely shaped and everything. But you don't look at that green and think, oh, that was just sitting there in the landscape. It's clearly a manufactured thing. But I think it looks really beautiful, right? That it looks compelling. And not because it's natural, but just because it itself is an interesting thing to look at, and some skill has been exercised in shaping this thing and turning it into almost like a piece of art. I guess the point is that I don't necessarily think a greens shaping has to be natural in order to be successful. All right, so just to quickly summarize the factors that can make a great green: 1, location; 2, drainage; 3, the relationship with the rest of the hole; 4, the test of the player's skill; 5, a variety of pin positions; 6, a variety of recovery shots; 7, originality; 8, elegance; 9, the attractiveness of the shaping and finish work. We've covered a lot of ground there, PJ. Any takeaways, any things that will stick with you as interesting about this particular lesson?
As somebody who doesn't hit a lot of greens in my day-to-day life, I think I'm most when I walk up to a green, I'm most focused on, all right, like where did I miss? Where should I have missed? What is the miss? And it does get, I think I might, and I'm probably harping too much on it, but from like a recreational standpoint, like where the variety of recovery shots, I think is pretty important. Like I think you have to give people a chance to even play, but B, it shouldn't be the same thing every single time.
You have to make something happen for them. Yeah, absolutely. You have to give them some kind of reason to engage with the next shot, for sure.
Yeah,
and that can sometimes be overlooked because, maybe an architect who is a former professional golfer might assume that people aren't really missing greens that much. But we do, of course. To us, PJ, what's around the green is extremely important.
So that's what I think maybe more, and I understand that's probably objectively wrong in this instance, but I do think from a professional golf standpoint, I think the point about are some greens too small or penalizing in ways that could deeply affect a tournament, and the reward is disproportionate for hitting a certain green or finding a certain spot because there's only one pin position on a certain green. I think that is, it's something that I don't know if I was like totally thinking about on a from a bird's eye view in the middle of a tournament, but I think I have a better understanding of that now for next time.
Yeah. And I think the key for me is that it's not, pros would definitely frame this as a fairness issue.
Yeah.
But for me, the more important thing is whether the green is still multidimensional. Because if a green is overly severe or overly penalizing or too small for the shot that's being hit into it, it's not that's wrong or against the law. It's more that it just isn't as interesting as it possibly could be. And that is a balance that an architect has to strike when designing a green, for sure. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you very much, PJ. This was fun as always. Hope you got a lot out of this episode. And yeah, I like the idea of doing a mailbag next time, just fielding a bunch of random questions. It feels like this a 101 series has gotten to the point where we can kind of pause on the topics that we're pursuing and see where people are in this process. But I know a lot of listeners are enjoying these episodes a great deal, and I appreciate that. I think a lot of people are living it right along with you, PJ.
Awesome. This was a blast. I'm glad we got into movie minute there but we tried to tie it back, so maybe we could do more of that in the mailbag. But thanks for having me. This was a blast.
Thanks, PJ. This episode of Designing Golf was produced by Will Balsam. Thank you, Will. Keep in mind that Fried Egg Golf Volume 2, our coffee table book, is available for pre-order right now. Go to proshop.thefriedegg.com. We're proud of what we have produced there, these course profiles that we write, the photos associated with them, the illustrations that Cameron Hurtis and Matt Ruchis do are pretty excellent. And so check this out. And, if you want a good deal on your coffee table book, then join us in Fried Egg Golf Club. Go to thefriedegg.com/membership to see what Fried Egg Golf Club is all about. But lots of fun to be had there as well. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back again soon with another episode.